Hello, I'm Dr. Scott Wadier.
And I'm Tommy Welling, and you're listening to the Fasting for Life podcast.
This podcast is about using fasting as a tool to regain your health, achieve ultimate wellness, and live the life you truly deserve.
Each episode is a short conversation on a single topic with immediate actionable steps. We cover everything from fat loss and health and wellness to the science of lifestyle design.
We started Fasting for Life because of how fasting has transformed our lives, and we hope to share the tools that we have learned along the way. Hey everyone, welcome to the Fasting for Life podcast. My name is Dr. Scott Wadier, and I'm here as always with my good friend and colleague Tommy Welling. Good afternoon to you, sir.
Hey Scott, how are you?
Fantastic, my friend. Excited for today's conversation. We are going to get into a really cool study of the impact of body weight loss on type 2 diabetes remission, a systematic review and meta-regression analysis of a randomized controlled trials. This article just came out in the spring of 2025, and some incredible takeaways. And if you're listening and go, well, I'm not a diabetic, great. We're also going to talk about the sustainable effects of what they discuss in the different lifestyle interventions and surgical interventions. And what is that phrase, Tommy? An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of, what is it? Help me out here.
Yeah, it's worth a pound of cure. Absolutely. So if you're not a diabetic, let's absolutely keep it that way. And the cool thing is looking into the future, looking along the lines of, hey, I just have a little bit of weight to lose, all the way to, hey, maybe my blood work's a little bit off, all the way to having some symptoms, or I have that kind of looming threat of a medication prescription that I don't want to fall into, or something else, or maybe it's a family history that I don't want to lean into. We're going to talk about how to keep you off of that track too.
So if it works for remission, then guess what? It works for prevention too, is what I probably should have said in the first place. So if you are new to the podcast, welcome in. Excited to have you with us on this journey. 280 episodes plus, week in and week out, going on 5 years plus now, bringing you a weekly episode with actionable items. So if you're new, you want to know more about Tommy, know more about me and our journeys and how fasting has transformed our lives, why we do what we do, why we have the challenges, the coaching, the resources, and why we do this, head back to episode 1. Give it a listen, and you'll know why and how and the what of our stories. It's short, concise, to the point, and just excited that you've given us a shot to be part of your health and weight loss journey. If you're a long-term listener, shout out to y'all. Keep the 5-star reviews coming. Keep the downloads, the likes, the shares, the rates, the reviews, whatever platform you listen in. We are grateful that you continue to tell the podcast gods and goddesses and whatever that works on the back end. You keep telling them and showing them that we are bringing valuable content and actionable stuff to you day in and day out, or week in and week out, I should say. So excited to get into it today. Tommy, we are going to talk about this study, and I'll lead with I won't bury the lead on this one. So it's the impact of body weight loss. Most people come to fasting to lose weight, but this is, and we talk a lot about the benefits of fasting, the additional benefits, the lab benefits, the health and longevity, and all those other benefits, right? Not just the weight loss, but the health that comes from it. So this is cool because it's the impact of body weight loss on type 2 diabetes remission, a systematic review and meta-regression analysis of randomized controlled trials. So we're talking about gold standard data here. And when we just look at big picture, they're going to look at what remission criteria is. So we're going to be talking about HbA1c, which is the 90-day kind of run of where your blood sugar is, and fasting plasma glucose or fasting blood glucose, or that morning AM reading after fasting, when you get your blood work done. And this is with no medications. So we're going to be looking at complete A1C under 6, or fasting plasma glucose under 100 for complete remission criteria. We're going to be looking at A1C under 6.5, or fasting plasma glucose of less than 126, which is partial, which is the pre-diabetic category. And the cool thing is that the criteria, which I really love, it was sustained for at least 1 year post weight loss intervention. So not just a quick fix, so to speak.
Right, and we've spoke recently about that, getting into that 2-year mark, where that really kind of draws a line in the sand between, has your body really adapted to this new weight? Is it going to be maintainable, sustainable? Because that's really, really important. Because if you look back towards the beginning of your weight loss journey or your fasting journey or your diabetes remission journey, if it were, um, you wouldn't set out on that if you thought that you couldn't do it long term or you weren't going to be able to keep the results, right? You just wouldn't have put in the effort. So putting in the effort means that I'm assuming I want to figure this out for the long term. Otherwise, what's the point? And so when we're looking at going beyond that 1 year mark, that's really, really important because it points to how sustainable was this. Are these numbers really important? Because if we're talking about remission or prevention of type 2 diabetes or being pre-diabetic or being overweight or obese, then we really need to understand how to adapt these tools for long term. And I love that this study went into some of those lifestyle components and even some of the, like, if you are on a blood sugar lowering medication, how does that affect the results? How does that affect the sustainability of it? And we'll talk more about that a little bit later on. But I just like the way that this was designed. They found 22 of these studies that kind of met the criteria to go into the what were they looking at? And so basically, they're drawing a direct line of correlation between body weight lost percentage and then complete or partial diabetes remission, like you just defined. And I love the fact that we can also put pre-diabetes on that timeline too, because every single person in here who had complete or partial also had pre-diabetes at
Was
one
on a
point.
progression.
Right. They were on the trajectory, right?
Yep.
And it started with, hey, I have a little bit of weight to lose. Hey, my blood work's a little bit off. I'm now having some of these triglycerides. I'm having an HDL LDL ratio that's off. My fasting blood glucose is starting to tick up. Maybe my liver
Some
enzymes
weight
are
gain
off.
around the waist.
Yeah, centripetal weight gain, right? Where my body roundness index, my BRI is starting to increase. And then at some point later on, it may have taken 5, 10 years. It may have been a couple of decades, but then they started being labeled with that. Well, you're falling into that diabetic category. Now we need to talk about interventions and different ways of eating and controlling carbohydrates and all of these kind of things. So we really want to be extrapolating this information for how to get the weight off, why to get the weight off, but then also what would it do if I prevented a lot of that additional weight gain or a lot of that additional symptomatology from progressing over future years too, which is so empowering.
And that's the crux of it, right? Is we have this timeline. So we have this goal of healthy lifestyle, living with vitality into our later decades. And we want that goal of not to be on medication and not to depend on others for help and to be,
Right.
having energy and all of those things that we want in terms of a quality of life. But that lives way off in the future. So if we zoom into kind of where we are in the present time, it's hard to then see kind of that progression, the wait and see. And that's the thing, the crux of the diabetes conversation. And my dad's a perfect example of this, where he was a diabetic for decades. And at 70 years of age, he decided to make a change and adopt the fasting lifestyle and be a little bit more conscious about his portion sizes and his plate choices and his timing of his food. He didn't really change that much in terms of what he's eating initially.
Yeah.
But he just started changing the time and allowing insulin to come down. So he decided to make those changes. We'll talk about the percentages of categories of partial and complete remission and or prevention. And if you look at how long you've had it, it increases the chances of remission. Obviously, that's a logical conclusion, and the data shows it as well. But
Or of it coming back after remission.
Or of it coming
even,
back,
right?
yeah.
Yeah.
So
we got to
in
be
my
extra
dad's
vigilant in those cases.
Yeah, and that's the thing. In my dad's case, he the deck was stacked against him, right?
Yeah.
He had it for years. He was on 120 units of insulin a day, had multiple forms of insulin at that point. He was, incredibly overweight, giant belly, right? And he decided, you know what, I'm going to do this. And he trusted the process. And he made those changes initially just by shrinking his eating window, right? With time restricted eating or fasting.
Wow.
And the weight started to come off. And we're going to share the percentages of those weight loss categories here in just a second in the statistics, which are staggering. But it allowed him to not get stuck in the present moment and kind of be on that low wait and see, we'll watch it, we'll manage it type approach, which is what we get stuck in this chronically distracted, stressed out, fast-paced world that most of us live in.
Sure.
So he would always say, all right, well, I can eat this if I take this. So he would do his blood sugar. He would say, all right, I'm going to eat this many carbs. And he would know if he's going to have this meal after doing it for years that, all right, if I take this amount of insulin, it's going to keep my blood sugar elevated, but in the acceptable range for a diabetic post-meal.
So a second dosing of pasta maybe also meant a second dosing of insulin?
No, he would know. He would just roll the dice. He's like, if I take this amount, then I would be able to eat these things. Because it's going to, my rolling average of A1C and fasting plasma glucose that I'm measuring with my finger prick would allow me to stay in this range, which is air quotes acceptable for management of the disease.
Yeah, so the medication is almost enabling the behavior.
Yeah.
Or giving some wiggle room on the behavior.
It has the power.
Yeah.
So that's why I love that we're talking about complete or partial remission. So I said I wasn't going to bury the lead. So let's just get into the actual statistics.
Okay.
So less than 10% total body weight loss was a 5% partial remission and 0.7% complete remission.
Okay.
So you didn't even scratch the itch.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. 10 to 19% loss was a 48% partial remission.
Okay.
Okay. Now we're getting somewhere.
Yeah.
Less medications, less procedures, better health outcomes, but there was no data for the complete remission in this category because a lot of the studies don't look at this intermediate loss. They typically look at like 5, 10, 20, 30. So there wasn't a lot of data here, but when we get into the 20 to 29% total body weight loss, 70%, 69.3 or 70% partial remission, 50% complete remission.
Wow.
Here's the fun one. And we talked about this on a recent episode. We mentioned it in passing, knowing that we were going to do this article. Greater than 30% weight loss reduction was an 89.5 or 90% partial remission and 79.1% complete remission.
Wow. So most of the vast majority of those folks were completely remitted from diabetes.
So let's talk about prevention. Lose 30% of your body weight? I mean, come on now. What's that percent in prevention? We don't know, but we can extrapolate. We can add some nuance to it.
We can make it very difficult for your body to ever develop, these blood sugar related issues going
and why
further.
does it matter? Because insulin resistance or that blood sugar imbalance, that metabolic dysfunction is a feature of almost every disease: diabetes, heart conditions, cancer, neurodegenerative disorders, autoimmune issues, etc. Well, I can eat the carbs and the sugars and all the stuff that stimulate insulin the most, or I can do low carb for a while, or I can do keto for a while, which there's some really cool data on a 90-day keto run for diabetes remission as well. We did an episode on that. But the question is, why can't the cells absorb the glucose properly? Well, there's mechanisms underlying that show up in the lab work and that progression over the years, but you just don't connect the dots because it's not how the system works.
Yeah.
So we need to remove the interference of that glucose uptake. Go ahead, Tommy.
Yeah, especially when it takes so long for something like this to develop.
Yeah.
Because you're looking at it from so zoomed out, very, very slow changes. And oftentimes there's not urgency unless it's maybe right before a doctor's visit that you're kind of worried about, or maybe there's some sort of external, like a holiday, or maybe there's a wedding or something else that can kind of spur you into some urgency to lose the weight. But I'll tell you what, most of the folks who we talk to, and a lot of listeners could probably resonate with this, where you're not necessarily worried. You haven't developed any of these symptoms, or maybe the blood work's not very, very off. And I was in this category too, where I didn't necessarily just see the weight as the predictor of future problems. It was just kind of like,
It was kind of in its own little category.
It is like they're so separated, but really, if we can understand that the correlation is so strong that the excess weight is very likely, if we keep it on and if it grows over the decades, it is likely to accelerate the disease process to where it puts us into a different category at some point. It might not be in our 20s, it might not be in our 30s, but it might be in our 50s or our 60s or maybe our 70s, where we could have had a much higher quality of life, could have had more energy and more vitality, like you mentioned, just a much better longevity and health span. Whereas with the excess weight for the decades, we put ourselves into a different category. So if we can roll back time then, and then we can be right now, which is like, yeah, I don't really care so much about the weight. We hear this a lot. I don't really care about the weight, because that's almost like I don't care about the aesthetics of the weight. But let's look at the weight not just as aesthetics, but as a leading indicator for future issues, for future underlying physiological imbalances. And then in that way, we can say, well, even if it's just 10 or 20 pounds, but especially if it's more than that, if it's 30, 40, if it's more than that, even if you don't have these symptoms, it's worth getting the weight off now, because then we're not having any additional time compounding, which is making those physiological imbalances much worse.
So we'll talk about those statistics and those factors in just a second here. So here's how to compartmentalize all the numbers and stuff we just said. Each 1% weight loss increased partial remission by 2.7% and complete remission by 2.17%. Each 1% weight loss. So I don't want to focus on the weight. I'm sick of dieting. I'm on the roller coaster. Yeah, we get it.
We get it. But 2 pounds, 1.5 pounds, 2.5 pounds, and then you just increase that percent of remission.
Get the abacus out. Start sliding those little colored beads from left to right or right to left, whatever. You get the point, right? Just keep ticking them. Keep ticking them. Keep ticking.
Because it's worth it.
It's absolutely worth it, because we know chronic lifestyle conditions, insulin resistance, blood sugar mismanagement, metabolic syndrome, et cetera, all can help you get there. Now, fasting is the super speeder, the super speed up button, right? It's like
the
Sonic.
turbo.
Yeah, it's a turbo. Yeah, my kids are big into Sonic right now. We took them to see Sonic 3, and my son wants to be Shadow, and sometimes he wants to be Spider-Man. But it's like the boost, the turbo boost, right?
Yeah.
So intermittent fasting allows you to pull that lever to get the scale moving more consistently than a lot of the calorie in, calorie out, eat less, move more stuff, because of all of those other hormonal signals and metabolic underpinnings, especially if you have insulin resistance. I was an undiagnosed pre-diabetic. I was in that range. I didn't have a fasting insulin test. My fasting blood sugar was in the 90s, which was air quotes normal back then. I didn't know any better. But I had a fasting insulin number that was severely elevated. I had all the telltale signs: slightly elevated liver enzymes, slightly elevated blood pressure. I carried a lot of lean mass on me because I was an ex-powerlifter. And you know, I had those signs in the looked like a strong man in the off season. Even though I could bench press a Buick, I still had that belly. So I had a lot of those anthropometric things as well. But consistent weight loss, again, is what we want to see. So why does IF work so well? Well, it immediately puts you in a deficit, right?
Of course.
And it still allows you to have some of the things you enjoy in the beginning as you're making this lifestyle change, because it immediately restricts the time that you eat. And we're going to do an episode on an upcoming pod about a 6-hour early eating window in terms of time restricted eating, and how it actually will maintain your muscle mass and help with the weight loss. So from a physiological standpoint. So I can't wait to have that conversation.
Yeah.
But then one of the other mechanisms is the hormonal changes. So it improves insulin sensitivity, which increases growth hormone levels and then ultimately promotes fat burning. And it taps into that metabolic switching effect. So fasting periods trigger the body to switch from glucose to fat as the primary fuel source. So we have these other benefits where that's why we have a fasting lifestyle application. And once you get through those first few weeks or those first nights of going to bed when you're doing a nomad overnight or you're doing a 36-hour fast, you start to feel those wins on the other end. So if you're looking for more direct like fasting protocols and fasting support, join a challenge, go grab our blueprint to fasting for fat loss, go check out the resources that we have in the show notes or on the website, because we give you some of those tools to get some of that momentum. So I want to talk about a couple of things in the actual study in terms of the clinical protocols that were studied, where the intervention types that they used were lifestyle changes, right? So diet, exercise, and behavior modifications. Bariatric surgery, so sleeves, bypasses, and adjustable bandings.
Okay.
And then pharmacotherapy. Now, one of the cool things about these RCTs in this meta-analysis was that it excluded drugs with direct glucose lowering effects like GLP-1s, unless those outcomes were measured 3 months post discontinuation. So we don't have a skewed data here in terms of, oh, well, they were taking a med that then ultimately gave us the result. So I love that this was a part of it. However, when you start looking at the practical implications of those weight loss targets, it has a couple of interesting comments when it comes to the lifestyle interventions. And it clearly says, well, yeah, the lifestyle interventions are good, but there's more of a remission that comes with it.
Yeah.
Compared to a surgery. And I will vehemently disagree with that.
Right. Well, the surgical outcomes, we know those aren't great, because going back to, did we make any of the changes that would actually extend this from a flash in the pan and then going to the 1 year, 2 year, 5 year mark, whenever there's something like a sleeve or a bypass kind of intervention? And the trouble with that, and they've got more sophisticated about that, where a lot of times they'll integrate some sort of psychological component. There might be some therapy involved with theirs, as far as healing some relationship with food and kind of changing some habits. But a lot of times those aren't very prolonged, and so they may not lead to actual behavioral changes, which then it's tough, because during those tough moments, whenever you used like food when you weren't necessarily physically hungry, but you had more food coming in, and then that's how some of the excess weight came on over time. And then you combine that with some of the lasting effects, like it hasn't been enough time to really, for your pancreas to necessarily heal some of the beta cell dysfunction that happened over years and years and years. Some of that's temporary, some of it's not necessarily so temporary.
Yep.
If there hasn't been time for those things to kind of balance and heal and correct, and then some of the old habits start to come back in, you can definitely see some major regression back into old habits, and see a lot of weight coming back on. So it's interesting when they make some of those statements within this study.
I found the exact statements.
I think you'd have to go out farther even than post 1 year to really start to have some good data on that anyway, at least from my personal anecdotal experience, kind of watching those things happen.
Yeah, and what they mentioned was, so lifestyle changes, 5 to 15% loss, remission rates seem to plateau at that 46% rate. And it says less sustainable than surgery. I mean, I would argue that I know lots of folks, and you have some in your family, that have had the bariatric surgeries and it hasn't worked.
Yep.
Right? So 58% remission at 2 years, but benefits diminish with diabetes duration. So early intervention, within 1 year of diagnosis, greater than 10% body loss triples the weight loss. 10% weight loss triples the remission odds. And then less than 2 years of a diagnosis, 3 times higher remission odds versus greater than 5 years.
Wow.
And then if you're already using insulin, which is just amazing that my dad was able to do this, cue the optimizer fasting, time restricted eating.
Yeah.
Halves remission odds versus non-insulin users.
So if you were looking to prevent rather than remit, then what that tells me is we'd be better off to just get the dang weight off now rather than waiting also, because prevention is likely to be much more likely and powerful in this process versus waiting till later. I don't have that much urgency about it, right?
Yeah, because the progression looks like this, and this is where I said earlier, it's hard to kind of zoom out and see that future thing off in the, oh, I don't have it yet, or oh, my family has
Mhm.
it, but yeah,
Yeah.
So the metabolic progression is you got amino acid and lipid dysregulation, right? So maybe not anything happening that you can see yet, but you're going to see some changes in liver enzymes and eventually your cholesterol panel and triglycerides. Then it
Hmm.
goes to the lipid metabolism issues. So you've got triglyceride and LDL changes, right? Which is part of the metabolic syndrome that leads to prediabetes and diabetes.
Right.
And then you've got protein and immune response issues. So chronic inflammatory response, um, recurrent infections, those types of things. Where my dad would always get like 10 times a year, cold, sickness, coughs, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And you see the anthropometric changes taking place on this progression. So, waist circumference, we've talked about this, is a strongest predictor of insulin resistance, outperforming BMI and body fat percentage.
Hmm.
So, a 1 centimeter per year increase in waist circumference raises diabetes risk by 79% in normal weight individuals.
Wow.
1 centimeter, not even an inch, y'all. Holy
No,
moly. I
that's
don't
not even
measure in
half an, that's not even
centimeters,
half an inch.
right?
Yep.
And then obviously the body fat percentage, 25% greater than men or 35% in women, correlates with prediabetes as well. And then you've got your lipid accumulation, your visceral adiposity index, or your body roundness index. We did a whole article, a whole episode on BRI. So the fat distribution, that waist circumference to height to waist ratio.
Mm.
And then the behavioral stuff, the sedentary lifestyle increases prediabetes risk by 40%. And then weight regain of 7 kilograms or 14 to 15 pounds post intervention reverses those remission benefits as well. So, how do we make it stick? Well, it's not in the glamorous stuff, it's in the consistent effort, the small changes. And that's where fasting comes in and making it sustainable. As the scale starts moving, get the dang weight off. As you make those lifestyle changes, your relationship with food changes, you start moving. We're not talking about going gung ho, biggest loser type workouts.
Hmm.
Just start walking. Get moving. Tap that category of sedentary lifestyle, right? That's going to stop you on that progression that I just outlined. And then we get to talk about prevention or remission or reversal. Because 80 million Americans right now are pre-diabetic and they don't know it.
Yeah.
Hey, that
On
was
the
me.
trajectory. Yeah, on the
Yeah.
trajectory, right? We can prevent going further down that trajectory. We can actually go backwards in time to being on lower rungs of that ladder and eventually just getting the heck off of that ladder. And the cool thing is when we start integrating more consistent fasting and we understand, okay, this is going to be something that I'm going to adapt for a long-term sustainability. I'm going to keep myself off of this progression, off this pre-diabetes and into diabetes progression, blood sugar mismanagement, uh, all of these blood sugar related issues. If we think about it like that, then what we also can do is realize that, especially in the beginning with fasting, there's a lot more wiggle room, kind of like what you described with your dad, and he was able to kind of dose up for insulin and other blood sugar lowering medications when he knew that his food choices weren't going to be the best, right? Or it was going to be more indulgent. And instead of drawing a boundary for himself right there in the moment, he was able to take more medication. And so, what we can do reverse engineering wise into fasting is we can take those food related decisions and knowing that in the beginning, there's more wiggle room for worse decisions and still seeing the scale move down. I definitely experienced that coming from a completely non-fasting lifestyle and then starting to fast without making any changes to my food just yet. It was kind of
Mm-hmm.
like, well, I don't really have a reason to make food related changes. I was doing some things well and then some things not well. I had some really good foods in there and then I had some really indulgent foods as well. And then, you get a little bit of feedback with that with how you feel and how long your fast is, but at the same time you can still have very bad habits like I did, especially in the beginning and still see progress, which can be problematic if at some point you're still making all of those same food decisions, but then the scale stops moving, well, then we're at a point of balance from our insulin levels to our blood sugar to our calories in versus calories out, and then to what the scale is doing relative to our movement as well. So the whole thing just kind of reaches a balance point. But if we want to get this right for the long term, then integrating more better food related decisions earlier in the process, and then also to your point, Scott, about physical movement, physical activity, integrating that within our fasting lifestyle as well, means that we have all of the pieces that we're going to be using later, maybe in a different way, but for long-term sustainability, rather than just everything feeling like it has to go through these big changes. I like to bring some parts of all the pieces together early in the process, if at all possible.
And just to overview the key takeaway, like, yeah, calorie restriction can work. It's a lot more difficult when you have that resistant component, right? You have that calorie out component with the hormonal changes, the metabolic changes, et cetera.
Mhm.
So if you're already in that place, then yeah, it can be frustrating. That's why a lot of people come to fasting. That's why a lot of people, look to fasting for weight loss. But it's, IF has a modest, statistically significant edge in fat loss and metabolic health markers. And most people find when to eat rules easier than calorie counting
Mm-hmm.
or swearing off food categories.
Right. Well, there's a lot less decisions with when to
Yeah.
eat versus every single time I think about food, exactly what to eat. And that doesn't take into account metabolic underlying physiological differences
Or
in
life
those as well.
stressors or any of that stuff.
Yeah.
So if you're looking for consistency, whether or not you still haven't figured it out, you're not on the right, you're kind of bobbing and weaving with it, fully haven't adapted the lifestyle. That's why we have the resources. That's why we have the challenges to help accelerate your progress. Have a safe place to talk about fasting, right? Because sometimes the social circles don't align, right? If you've got a personal trainer
Sure.
still telling you to eat protein 3 times a day in 30 to 40 gram increments, well, the research clearly shows that you can do 100 to 120 grams one meal a day and still get the same and or greater benefit when it comes to lean muscle growth.
Yeah.
So
Even
there's
your
a
spouse and kids could be friction too,
yeah,
though, especially at the beginning of your fasting
yeah.
journey.
There's a lot of noise, right? There's a lot of
Sure.
noise out there. So I love that we can look at this big picture and see the percent improvements when we look at greater than 30% body loss, 90% partial, 80% complete versus 10 to 19% or 10% body loss, which is 5% partial, 0.7% complete.
Mm-hmm.
So get the dang weight off, right?
Our fat cells are hormonally active.
Yep.
And they're not just sitting there as a static problem. They're creating dynamic miscommunications all throughout the body that need to be dealt with now and not waited for later, not
To make
looked
it
at.
more difficult.
Yeah, it's going to create a more complex problem in the future. So we need to deal with it now. We need to understand that the weight is highly correlated with these future really, really important problems. Even if it doesn't look like you have those problems now, the weight is very likely to influence how your health looks, decades down the road.
Yep, absolutely. So if you're looking for more support, reach out, head to the show notes, grab the blueprint, grab the resource, take the insulin assessment. Happy to have you join one of our next challenges. You'll get a accelerated version of 7 days of live coaching, resources, an incredible private Facebook community. You don't have to have Facebook. We do these live with you each and every day.
Yeah.
But Tommy, excited for this. Again, just proud of my dad for doing it. We've got dozens and dozens and dozens of other testimonies of folks that have done it as well. But just know, move the damn needle, however you can move it. If it's 0.1% a day, 1% a day, 5% a day, whatever it is, we need to take that consistent action over time. So take something from today's conversation, put it into your day-to-day fasting today, shrink your window, set your timer, make a better food choice, go for a walk, whatever it is, and know that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure any day of the week. So Tommy,
Love it.
Appreciate the conversation as always, man, and we will talk soon.
Thank you. Bye.
So, you've heard today's episode, and you may be wondering, where do I start? Head on over to thefastingforlife.com and sign up for our newsletter, where you'll receive fasting tips and strategies to maximize results and fit fasting into your day-to-day life.
While you're there, download your free Fast Start guide to get started today. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure to leave us a 5-star review, and we'll be back next week with another episode of Fasting for Life.